Hey everybody, how you doing? Good, I hope. We're going to talk a little bit more about this Coleman case. Some of you knew about it, some of you didn't, but you've asked me to give you a little more information. Today I want to take a look at some things in the case, and I also want to take a look at the parents and how they relate to the Watts. And you might find it funny, but strange, funny, kind of funny, that Chris Coleman's father's name is Ron, and his mother is Connie. Begins with a C, right? Kind of crazy that they both have fathers named Ron. But we're going to take a look here at just how the parents are similar, but I'm also going to tell you that Ron had something crazy that was found on his computer that might just make you be like, ew. I don't know. This might stack the deck that they're crazier. I don't know. We'll see. So, okay. Now, the man convicted of murdering his wife and 2 children says he was set up. And I also have another something coming out where this retired detective says that he knows who's responsible for this murder, and it's not Chris Coleman. We'll get to that too. Not this. That has to be on its own. Anyway, so the man convicted of murdering his wife and children says he was set up. His father also said Coleman's affair wasn't a motive for the murder, but rather due to his wife's lack of respect. Who does that sound like? Blame it on the wife, right? Blame it on the victim. Wasn't his son. No. The jury sentenced Chris Coleman to life in prison after convicting him of strangling his wife Sheri and their 2 boys, Gavin and Garrett. Coleman is a minister's son. Actually, the mother is a pastor as well. And during the murders, he was the bodyguard for the world-renowned televangelist Joyce Meyer of Joyce Meyer Ministries. This occurred in Columbia, Illinois on May 5th, 2009. There was spray paints all over the walls in candy apple red that said things like, "I am always watching, you have paid and punished." So now the police and prosecutors said that Coleman spray painted the walls himself to make it look like someone else killed his family. He had a more elaborate type of a scheme than Chris there. They even traced threatening emails to his own laptop because he really had a plot here. He started with these threatening emails, and then he went to hand-delivered letters to the mailbox. And the one letter that said, in part, "I will kill them all as they sleep." Coleman talked to Crime Watch Daily by phone from prison. This is what he said. This is his own words, okay? Chris Coleman's words. "Actually, what never came out in court is I had 2 laptops, and I traveled with one and I left the other one either at home or at the office. They were never both on me at the same time, and the one that was connected to the threats was the one that I would leave either at home or at work. They never presented that. They never presented at the point of entry there are fingerprints that are unknown. In this petition have state crime," either whoever typed this up, but I think what he's saying, in this petition, the state crime lab reports has a set of fingerprints that are unknown and do not match anyone. Not Mr. Coleman, not his family, not his friends, not any of the police officers, no one. During the trial, a computer expert said that the sender of the threatening emails signed in using Coleman's personal ID. The jury in 2011 was deadlocked for a while, but was ultimately swayed by Coleman's affair with Tara Linst. She wore a promise ring when she testified in court, which I told you yesterday. Coleman told her that he would present his wife, Sheri, with divorce papers on May 4th or May 5th. Well, we know he said May 4th, and then he said there was a typo in Sheri's name, and that's why he said May 5th, the day they were killed. Police found Sheri, Gavin, and Garrett dead in their home on May 5th. Now, here comes Ron. Coleman's father, Ron, insists his son is innocent. He told Crime Watch Daily's Anna Garcia that his son's affair was not the motive for murder. Tara was just meeting a need that at the time Sheri wasn't taking care of, he said. Sounds like he likes Tara. These guys like, I don't know. Wait till you hear what was on his computer. When asked to clarify, Ron Coleman answered, well, I mean, every man has his desires, and every man has to be respected. It's built into every man. If your wife doesn't respect you, then you're going to find respect someplace else. Is respect, I guess Ron uses respect as a synonym for sex. Okay. Reporter Garcia followed up, so are you saying Sheri was a bad wife? And he says, just that at that short brief time she stepped back from doing her job as a wife, he said. So I guess Ron then thinks that that's okay, right? Instead of a lot of other ways he could address it, then it's totally fine. It's kind of along the lines that if somebody wears a certain outfit, then they deserve to be raped. I guess Ron might be from that school too. I don't know what's going on here. Certainly sounds like he's blaming the victim. Listen to this one. Ron, the dad. What is your opinion of Chris's mistress? And what she said about how they were planning to get married and how she had a promise ring. And he says, she bought the promise ring, said Ron Coleman, Chris's father. There was no seriousness to that. Chris was actually trying to get away from it when his wife and him was getting along better. When his wife and him was getting along better. That's some good grammar. He was trying to break it off with the mistress. Ron. I wonder why, Ron. Wait till you find out what's on Ron's computer. Yes, and that wasn't working, said Ron. They say cops found a receipt dated 3 months earlier when Chris bought the can of apple red paint. But his father, Ron Coleman, says that doesn't mean Chris is the killer. The spray paints on the walls match the spray paint bottle that your son admits to have purchased. Well, yeah, he purchased it because him and Gavin were going to make a bullseye for them to shoot their paint guns at, and whoever did it grabbed the can, says Ron. So now Coleman has filed an appeal, like I told you, and but his appeal is based on other things about the dates and all that stuff on the photos. In 2011, when he was found guilty and then he was in prison, the Reverend Ronald Coleman said his son Christopher Coleman is adjusting to a Pontiac, Illinois prison after being transported there last week following his conviction on 3 counts of first-degree murder. But see, Coleman's been moved, okay, for his own protection, and he is in the same Dodge Correctional Facility that Christopher Watts is. So they're together. And then also Stephen Avery is in that prison as well. But Stephen Avery didn't kill children, okay? And Stephen Avery is, a lot of people feel didn't commit that murder of Teresa. All right, so let's go here now. He says we got a letter from him this morning, and he says he's doing okay. And this is 2011, but I just wanted you to hear what he says. Chris Coleman, who traveled the world protecting a televangelist, Joyce Meyer, as her bodyguard, was convicted on May 5th, it was exactly 2 years to the day that it happened, of strangling his wife Sheri and his 2 sons in their home in Columbia, Illinois in 2009. Prosecutors argued that Coleman deserved the death penalty because he felt them die, but a judge spared him the death penalty and sentenced him to life in prison. The letter stated in part, this is now Chris in the letter to his parents, as for me personally and emotionally, I'm doing good, which I know is all God. I love you all so much. Everyone here at the Pontiac State Prison has treated me very good. God is in charge, and his ways are higher than ours. Ronald Coleman, a pastor at Grace Church in Chester, Illinois, said his son maintains his innocence and will appeal his conviction. Coleman says he hadn't spoken to his son on the telephone since he was transported last week from Monroe County Jail in Waterloo, but that a jail inmate gave his son paper and an envelope to mail the letter. He said that his son is alone in a cell and is reading a Christian book. Ronald Coleman has said his son helped a Waterloo jail inmate become born again. During trial earlier this month, prosecutors described Christopher Coleman in starkly different terms as a methodical, lust-driven architect of an unspeakable crime. Police testified that Christopher Coleman didn't ask detectives how his family died as they investigated the case on the day of the murders, and that he punched an ambulance gurney to cover up scratches on his forearms, like I told you in the other video. Ronald Coleman disputes that, saying a police chaplain told him how the family died, that he relayed it to his son. That was when he started punching the gurney, Ronald Coleman said, so Ronnie was there pretty right away for this, right? Did Ronnie know this was going to happen? Did he know it happened? Remember, he called the girlfriend, remember? He called the mistress, Ronnie did. Police said officers were constantly with Coleman after the bodies were discovered. So the police are saying, yeah, liar, liar, pants on fire, we were with him the whole time. Nobody told him anything. Prosecutors said the crime was the culmination of a plan to clear the way for him to marry his mistress without exposing adultery that would have threatened his $100,000 a year job as Joyce Meyer's bodyguard. The Reverend Ronald and Connie Coleman are in a position few would understand. It's hard to even describe what you go through, Ronald Coleman said Friday. He runs Grace Church Ministries in Chester alongside his wife. Everything is on hold. We've lost a lot. We love those kids. We love Sheri. The Colemans are visible figures in this small town, about 50 miles southeast of St. Louis, which means everyone knows of them and of the high-profile murder case. Now, this is Chris's mother talking. This is Connie. I went to Walmart and heard people talking about it, Connie Coleman said. I just walked out crying. There's no sense in saying anything. They said they were unnerved by the appearance of a surveillance camera on a utility pole near their home. They said they were told it was placed there by law enforcement, but they don't know why. During their 2-week jury selection process, some prospective jurors expressed negative sentiments that, judging from pretrial publicity, they believe Christopher Coleman is guilty. Ronald Coleman said his son was emotionally low during jury selection, and listening to some of the jurors' responses, he said Chris spends his days alone at the Monroe County Jail, where he receives 6 to 9 letters a day, most of them from people he doesn't know. I'm sure he probably has fangirls like Chris Watts. He's read a library of Christian books, the father said. Really? He was reading a library of Christian books, Ron? Maybe he should have read a library of Christian books before he killed his family. For his part, Ronald Coleman said the case initially hurts his ministry. We lost some people, Coleman said, but now we have more than we did before. What about the people in your family you lost, Ron? Your daughter-in-law, your 2 grandsons? You lost some people? Maybe they are not too far from the Wattses. Chris Coleman was a preacher's kid. Both Ron and Connie Coleman are pastors, and hundreds of Christians from neighboring towns, black and white, young and old, fill their non-denominational church every week. The Coleman boys grew up speaking in tongues, code from the Holy Spirit, and basing decisions on quotes from Scripture. Their father preached clear teaching from the Bible, and there was always music, the kind that makes teenage girls sing at the top of their lungs and weep with the sheer joy of being loved. Amid all of this outpouring, Chris was reserved, the quiet and gentlest of the three blonde, well-mannered Coleman boys. Quiet and gentle. Who else is described like that? His mother says the worst curse word he ever said in front of her is P-I-S-S. Charlie Mattingly, his junior high school coach in basketball, baseball, and track, says you couldn't ask for a better kid. He was very kind. He was a team player. I hardly ever saw him lose his temper. He went out one night and had drunk a little bit. His parents were out of town and he felt so guilty. He called his high school basketball coach and confessed. Chris wouldn't go hunting with his father, and the first time we butchered a rabbit, he was just beside himself. Connie remembers. When a Marine recruiter came by to his high school, Chris came home with stars in his eyes. Impressed by the way the guy carried himself, he signed up right after high school. Ron thinks he would have stayed in the service for life, except that Bill Clinton and Monica. And all that was a disappointment. Isn't that ironic? He left the military because Bill Clinton had an affair with Monica Lewinsky. And I don't remember Bill Clinton killing his family, but he was so put off by this that he left the military and yet annihilated his family. And he'd met Sheri, Connie adds. Chris was 22, piling up military certifications and honors when they met. Sheri was 21, an MP in the U.S. Air Force. They were both studying at K-9 Training Center in San Antonio. 3 months later, in August 1997, Ron stood at the window of the family home in Chester, watching his son's car pull up. "Connie," he called. "He's got somebody with him." Chris introduced Sheri as a friend who lived in Chicago. He said he was going to run her home. "We didn't pick up on anything," Ron says. That's because they're very sharp people. "Except she was a worldly little girl, little short shorts, tattoo on her leg. Not the person we thought he'd be with." What's he doing with that little worldly girl? You see her with those short shorts and that tattoo, Connie? Not right for our son at all. Chris left to drive Sheri home and didn't come back. The next morning, the phone rang. His first words were, "Dad, you'll never believe what we did. We got married." Ron remembers. I was quiet. Chris said, "Dad, you don't seem excited." I said, "Give me a few minutes." Chris realized right away that the marriage hadn't been godly. Ron adds, "My gosh, he was raised in a church. He was repentant and broken over it." He said, "Oh, I just got caught up in the moment," Connie recalls. We said, "Well, it's a lifetime." But we found out later that she was pregnant. Yep. When Chris got the job as a bodyguard for Joyce Meyer, Connie was worried. And Chris once told his worried mother that being a bodyguard was just a matter of looking tough. The bald head, being beefed up, never smiling, it's all intimidation, 99% of it. He was growing his hair out, though, in the spring of 2009. So in the day of the murders, Chris had gone to the gym. Another neighbor, Detective Sergeant Justin Barlow, this is the one that lived across the street, wakes up to a ringing telephone at 6:42 a.m. He was up just 3 hours ago trying to rock his wide-awake 6-month-old son back to sleep. He glanced out the window as he jiggled the baby, wondering whether the threatening letters the Colemans had been receiving are as ominous as they sound. Now, Chris Coleman is on the phone. Barlow doesn't really know the guy. He waved to him a couple of times when Chris and his wife Sheri first moved into the Columbia Lakes subdivision, but saw no response. A few days ago, though, another officer showed Barlow the threats. They started with emails on November 4th that accused evangelist Joyce Meyer of preaching bullshit. They didn't threaten Joyce or her family, but they threatened the family of her bodyguard, Chris Coleman. "I will kill them all while they sleep," the sender warned. Now letters had been showing up in the Coleman's mailbox. The most recent one on April 27th closed with, "This is my last warning. Your worst nightmare is about to happen." Barlow offered to mount a surveillance camera in his 3-year-old son's window aimed straight at the Coleman's mailbox. The camera's on now, clicking and whirling in the background. As Chris says, in essence, "My wife's not answering the phone. I need you to check on the kids. I need you to check on her and the kids. I'm on the JB Bridge. I'll be there in about 5 minutes." Barlow throws on clothes, calls his dispatcher at the Columbia Police Department, and grabs his weapons, cuffs, and radio. He's on the Coleman's front porch when Officer Jason Donjon pulls up. "Nobody's answering," Barlow calls, and Donjon heads to the back. A minute later, Barlow's radio crackles. "You better come back here. There's a window open. The screen's out." They radio for backup, climb in through the window, and clear the basement. Guns drawn, they slowly mount the steps, Donjon going first because he's in uniform. The air is acrid with paint fumes, and when they reach the first floor, they see the writing sprayed blood red across the kitchen breakfast area. "Punished. I'm always watching." And up the staircase, "You have paid." At 6:56 a.m., 13 minutes after he called from the Jefferson Barracks Bridge, Chris pulls up in the driveway just as Officer Steve Patton pulls up outside. The officers ask Chris to wait outside. Donjon keeps his gun pointed up the next set of stairs where the spray-painted messages lead. They know whatever's up there isn't good, and they go up single file. Donjon goes up towards the master bedroom, so Barlow turns the other way and goes down into one of the kids' rooms. A little boy's in bed, half covered, looking like he's sleeping, except that his skin is grayish and mottled and his limbs are rigid. Barlow hears Donjon call out. He's found Sheri. Patton finds Gavin, and when Barlow moves to the doorway and sees the second child dead, he has to focus hard to hold it together. "This might be our guy. Limit what we tell him," Patton warns as they go back downstairs. Barlow nods, takes a deep breath. "They didn't make it, Chris," he says. "They didn't make it." Asked to stay outside, Coleman doesn't protest, just sits on the ground and sobs. Then he pulls out his phone and calls his father. And that's how his father got there okay. Chief Joe Edwards of the Columbia Police Department squats next to Chris, while the police chaplain, the Reverend Jonathan Peters, tells him that his family's been killed. Peters doesn't tell him how, and Chris doesn't ask. Edwards suggests that Peters sit with Chris in the back of an ambulance. The media is already swarming. Chris's father, the Reverend Ron Coleman, pastor of Grace Church Ministries in Chester, Illinois, pulls up onto somebody's lawn and leaves his keys in the ignition. He ducks under the crime scene tape, his face white. Joyce Meyer arrives soon after. Inside the ambulance, Peter will later testify, Chris looks down at the red marks on his right arm and asks, "How did these get here?" It sounds like when Chris asks, right? "What's going to happen now? What's going to happen?" Minutes later, according to Peters, Chris starts banging his fists on the gurney. By now, Edwards has called the commander of the Major Case Squad of Greater St. Louis, Major Jeff Conley of the Granite City Police Department, saying, "I want the best of the best. Dozens of officers are arriving from all over the metro area, and Connor's trying to coordinate them and the media." He assigns Barlow and Detective Dave Bivens of the Illinois State Police to interview Chris. They talk to him in a small gray room at the Columbia Police Department. He's wearing a t-shirt, sleeves cut off, and gym shorts, and he says he's cold. Barlow and Bivens leave for a minute, and he puts his head down and he sobs, the harsh, breathed-out sobs of a man not used to crying. He stops. The detectives return with a blanket he can wrap around himself, and Barlow asks a few casual questions about his military service. Chris gives details readily. He seems dazed, intractable, surprisingly passive for a former U.S. Marine whose job it is protecting people's lives. They ask him about that morning. He says he got up at 5:30 a.m. and he went to the bathroom to get dressed and left. As he drove away, he called Sheri to wake her, and she didn't answer, of course. He stops short, and then he resumes. "So I went on to the gym. I called her again on the way back out. She didn't respond, so that's when I called you. He says he was home the day before, ran a couple of errands, picked up the kids from school, played catch with Garrett, and waited on Sheri to get home. She got off work at 4, and then she actually made dinner. Pasta and chicken, and she cut up some kind of pizza. She mixed it all together. He laughs a little appreciatively. It's pretty good, actually. After dinner, they all walked up to the snow cone stand. Then Chris played catch with Gavin. I went to Zach's gym, and then I came back and helped put the kids to bed. While Sheri put steroid cream on Gavin's poison ivy, Chris listened to Garrett's prayers, and then he says he and Sheri watched TV, Batman Returns, and she fell asleep in my arms on the couch. Barlow asked Chris about the scratches and red marks on his arm. I think it was when I was in the gurney in the ambulance I was hitting the pillow. He speaks with pride of his job as Joyce Meyer's bodyguard. She's on TV in 37 languages. In 3/4 of the world. He also tells them about the security surveillance company he started, Executive Innovations, but he doesn't mention his own security camera, which might have recorded an intruder until the detectives prompt him. Beryl and Bivens take periodic breaks and leave the room. Information is tumbling in from officers in the field. They return nonchalant, as though they've just peed or swigged a pop. But soon, they know that the family friend Chris mentions, Tara Lynch, is more than that. After hearing part of the interview on closed-circuit television, an officer located her in St. Petersburg, Florida, and homicide detectives are already there grilling her. Chris met Lynch through his wife. Tara and Sheri were best friends at Largo High School in Florida. They even looked alike, pretty with dark hair and lithe bodies. And Chris tells detectives Tara's personality was the same as Sheri's. She's never pushy about anything. So, okay. He admits to a little sexy phone flirtation, but not an affair. I wouldn't do that to my kids. I've seen too many divorces and stuff. He says he saw Lynch at a Joyce Meyer conference in Florida, but doesn't mention that she joined him at a subsequent conference in Arizona and another in Hawaii. Nor does he mention the promise rings that they wear when they're together. Okay, so talk of marrying in January 2010. Have the Colemans ever thought about divorce? We talked about it a while back, about possibly maybe splitting up or something. You know, it never happened, obviously, Chris says, adding that they got counseling and things have been going awesome. Asked about his finances, he says, I make over $100,000 a year. She don't have to work. But she enjoys it, so I let her work. He lets her work. Come on, he lets her work. Rather than acknowledge the severity of their debts, he mentions a trip that they're planning to take to Disneyland. So we have debt. He doesn't say he canceled it and booked a cruise to the Virgin Islands with Tara instead. Chris just thought that really isn't important at all. No, because that's his friend, remember? So he just canceled a trip to Disney and booked one to the Virgin Islands with his mistress. Well, she's really his friend, though. Barlow draws on Chris's faith. Believing in what we believe in, knowing we can be forgiven for the sins we do, what do you think should happen to whoever did this? Chris hesitates. He should be put away. Is there any way you think the person who did this maybe has an explanation? Barlow asked gently. I'm sure they have an explanation. Bivens takes over. Do you think you've been 100% honest with us? Yeah. Did my best with it. Did his best with it. Come on now. Can't ask for more than his best. Dad never does. Ron never does. As more information streams in, they lean harder on him. He insists Sheri was alive when he left home. What would you say if I told you I don't think she was, Bivens said. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I think she was. She was. She was laying right beside me. Do you think we have the resources and the capacity to determine time of death? Yeah, definitely. I see it all the time on TV. See it on TV all the time. Chris is smart. He watches TV. He sees it all the time. He knows that they can determine the time of death. That's probably where he also saw this, Charles Manson scheme that he put up. They leave again. Chris gulps water down, sits down, then stands up again, restless. He walks across the room. He picks up Bevan's notepad. He turns one page back and reads, later congratulated for his brilliance in leaving the notes behind. Bivens will admit he didn't do it on purpose, but he will in the future. Chris is seated again when the detectives return. So, you're saying some madman sat in the shadows and waited for you to leave and then entered your house? Bivens finally asks. That's the only thing I can assume. They leave again. Chris sniffles loudly. A sob comes again. He leans forward, head in hands, and cries. Then he reaches for his water and drinks, sits up straight, gives a shaky sigh. He puts the blanket across the front of his body, covering his arms, and waits. When detectives are out of the room, Chris gets a text from his dad. Wow, this sounds eerily familiar, doesn't it, Daddy? My dad just texted me asking if I needed a lawyer. Do I need to get one for any reason? Well, right now, we're just kind of going over everything with you as far as what you did the night before. Have you seen anyone else outside of your wife? And Chris says, what do you mean? In a romantic way. No, Tara in Florida, I talked to her a ton lately. Just a friend, someone to talk to. Cops asked Chris how Sheri seemed on the morning he left for the gym. Remember, the pathologist concluded that she was already dead. She seemed fine when you left. Nothing that you could tell? No, she was fine. When you left the house this morning, your wife was alive? Oh, yeah. Okay. What would you say if I told you I don't think she was? I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, I think she was. Chris thinks his wife was alive when he left the house that morning. There was nothing on surveillance video that showed anyone stuck into the home in the middle of the night. Remember, the police officer that lived across the street had put a camera facing the Coleman's house because of the mailbox threats, and no one was detected that didn't live in the house that went in the house. Listen, man, she wasn't alive when you left. She was alive. No, she wasn't. She was, and she was laying right beside me. Listen to me. We can go back and forth with this all day long, but the physical evidence doesn't lie. She was not alive when you left this morning. The children weren't alive when you left this morning. Yes, they were. No. Come on, Chris. They were. We've got to get over this. Were you involved in her death? No. Okay, was someone you know involved in her death? I don't know. And this is when he doesn't answer like Chris does, just like, I don't know. He does, he felt like he goes this, I don't know. Like, he has a little more emotion here at this point than you can watch the interrogation. They're on YouTube, but you'll see. Did you know? Did you talk to anybody about arranging her death? No, absolutely not. Detectives now circle back to Tara. Were you having an affair with anybody? No. Okay, so you said you had a good close friendship, but you were actually doing anything that you felt wouldn't be approved by your wife? Some of the conversation, probably. All that circumstantial evidence is beginning to point to Chris as the man who might have had the motive to strangle his wife and boys. Then the cop drops a bombshell. The St. Petersburg Homicide Unit is talking to Tara right now. And she's showing us the pictures that you sent her. You got Tara down there in St. Petersburg spilling her guts to a room full of homicide detectives that do nothing but homicides. And they said, I know you guys were in Hawaii together. I know that she used your credit card, all right, to sit there and pay her bills last month. Tara is Chris's secret mistress, not so secret anymore to detectives. What do you think she's going to tell those guys down there in St. Petersburg about you and this relationship, all right? Columbia, Illinois cops asked St. Petersburg Police Major Shannon Halstead and her team to interview Tara just hours after the triple homicide. When I went to visit Tara at her condo, she answered the door and she was visibly upset. I had a gut instinct that she was going to somehow be an important piece of this investigation. Major Halstead tells Crime Watch Daily, "How long have you been in a relationship with Chris?" "Since late November, early December." "Where all have you guys been going together?" Phoenix and Hawaii, Maui." "What would he tell his wife when he was gone?" "Oh, he would have just told her he's working." "So Sheri was not aware of the affair that you were having?" "No, I know she suspected, but..." In the first of 3 interviews with police, Tara reveals that she had become possessive of her married lover. She became possessive of him. He always would take pictures when he's going to sleep to prove that, he wasn't sleeping with her or anything. What does that sound like? He's always in the basement. He doesn't talk to her at all. He doesn't talk to her, and he always sleeps in the basement. See, now, to us, he tried to paint that it was a rosy, perfect marriage. That's what she says, nope, they never kissed, never hugged. But you had even registered on some wedding sites and stuff and looked at some rings. I looked at stuff, but with his job, he, can't be living with anybody unless he's married. Had you guys ever talked about having children together? Mm-hmm. So then they said, did he send you some type of message shortly after all this happened, after he had come home and discovered all this? He texted me. What was the message? From there. And she goes, oh, from then? I'll call you when I can. I'm all right. Tara then reveals Chris texted her only moments ago. Apparently he was right in the middle of his own interrogation. I got a text. I know you know that. He texted me. I just thought I'd tell you. You know? He just texted you? That's fine. What do you want now? Just that he was thinking about me, and the wake was 3 tomorrow. Columbia, Illinois detectives soon arrive in St. Petersburg, Florida, and in a third interview, they surprised Tara with information about where some of her sexy selfies ended up. Since going through your phone, your computer, and obviously we've done the same with Chris and even his dad's, and there happens to be a picture of you rather compromising on his father's computer. Okay, that's pretty interesting. I didn't know anything about it. Tara is clearly nervous, crossing and uncrossing her legs. Did Chris tell you anything about these? Or that he was planning anything like this? Absolutely not. Did you have any knowledge of these homicides? No knowledge. Like it or not, your name is Tara Motive. Yeah, exactly. But Tara had absolutely no involvement in triple murders. She's only a witness. Chris Coleman was in a pressure cooker, and Major Shannon Halstead, he was getting pressure from Sheri Coleman. He was getting pressure from the ministry. And then ultimately, I think Tara was giving him ultimatums. Back in Illinois, Chris Coleman was not admitting any guilt, so cops throw a Hail Mary. We've got to have a come to Jesus type of meeting, and unless you really forgive yourself and you're really sorry for what you did, there's no way that you're going to go to heaven and see your kids and your family again when you die. You're going to go straight to hell. Chris isn't going to hell just yet, but he's on the way to the closest thing, county jail. Okay, so that is a lot on Chris Coleman. That's a lot on his parents. So his parents, seem to be very similar in ways to the Wattses. That I can see right now, while they blame her for the affair, they're saying that wasn't a motive in the murders and they believe their son is innocent. So because Sheri's deceased, they didn't pull Sheri killed the kids and then he killed Sheri. Nothing like that. He had nothing to do with this, is their stance. So they haven't really, besides that she was a worldly girl and her shorts were too short and she had tattoos, really come out and said a lot of bashing things about her the way that the Wattses have. Let me know if you've heard more bashing statements yet. It's like I said, I'm digging into this case, and I know this It's just like a lot of information all at once, and that tends to be what I do. And then I'll narrow it down and take specifics. But we're just getting like a lot, like an information dump out there. So some of it may be a little out of order or whatever, but it's just giving us all the information, and then we can key in on certain components in different videos. But let me know what you think about how these parents compare to the Wattses, how Chris compares to Chris Watts. And remember, I'm going to tell you about that retired detective that now says that John Bonet's murder, that these Coleman murders, that the Zodiac murders, that I think the Atlantic killings and other ones are all tied to this one serial killer. And he's got this theory on it. It's really like out there. But let me know if you've heard about that one. Anyway, I am going to go now. I will talk to you guys soon. Thanks for watching. Bye now.